Well, right now we're enjoying each other because the parents aren't there.
So drowning in $20,000 of inescapable debt, trapped under the roof of hostile in-laws in a sprawling foreign country that feels more alien by the day. You think this suffocating isolation, this complete lack of personal autonomy is the absolute hardest chapter of your life. You believe this is the climax of your stress, a narrative carefully manufactured and edited for millions of television viewers. But the script is about to be violently thrown out the window. The cameras stop rolling, the stage lights power down, and a doctor walks into the sterile room to deliver an absolute death sentence. Your own nervous system is preparing to shut down, locking you inside a failing biological vessel. This is not a quirky television plotline. This is the horrifying, unscripted reality of a reality TV fairy tale turned biological nightmare. Before we pull back the curtain on this terrifying reality, before we drag this tragedy into the light, shatter the like button and subscribe. The screen is a lie. For 15 years, audiences consumed their international romance as a quintessential reality television arc. We watched Jenny abandon her entire existence in California, leaving behind her home, her established routines, and her familiar support systems to chase a digital connection across the globe to India. We witnessed the intense culture clashes, the high-stakes family drama, the secret rendezvous, and finally, the long-awaited marriage in 2021 that supposedly gave everyone their picturesque happy ending. But that highly documented television arc was nothing more than a fragile house built directly on top of a grinding tectonic fault line. The structural damage to their lives was severe, extensive, and entirely hidden beneath the glossy veneer of reality. Entertainment. To truly grasp the magnitude of the catastrophic pivot that hit them in July of 2026, you have to look into the suffocating darkness of their financial and psychological isolation before the medical tragedy even struck. Their behind-the-scenes reality was incredibly bleak. They were systematically failing to survive. Sumit had lost his employment, instantly stripping away their only reliable stream of income. In a desperate bid to simply keep a roof over their heads, he was forced to take out a massive, high-interest loan of nearly $20,000 just to cover basic rent. This was not the result of a single missed payment. This was a compounding, suffocating hole of debt, a systemic failure of their finances that occurred right after his parents had completely severed them financially. Plunged into absolute poverty, completely dependent on the very family that resented her presence, Jenny was left with zero personal space and a total lack of independence. They were attempting to run a failing family cafe while living under an unbearable psychological pressure cooker. Fans saw the tremors of this structural collapse on spin-off shows, watching Jenny storm off camera during explosive fights, but viewers consumed those dramatic moments as mere entertainment. The audience conveniently forgets that the grinding, exhausting reality of international relocation and mounting poverty does not simply pause when the producer yells, "Cut." The crushing financial debt and the total lack of autonomy were a constant tectonic pressure continuously grinding beneath their marriage. But just as that immense familial and financial pressure seemed to be reaching an explosive boiling point, an unscripted biological tragedy violently intervened. In May of 2026, rumors began circulating through the darkest corners of the internet that Jenny had suffered a massive stroke. Navigating her own profound private grief, she was forced to publicly confront the speculation. She stepped in front of the world to correct the record, announcing a reality far more devastating than a stroke. She had been diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. This diagnosis forces an immediate, devastating recalibration of every single priority in human existence. To understand the sheer horror of this disease, you have to picture the human brain as a highly advanced supercomputer and the muscles as the external machinery it operates. ALS does not damage the computer, and it does not break the machinery. It slowly, ruthlessly, and irreparably destroys the vital cable connecting them. It aggressively attacks the motor neurons in the brain and the spinal cord. As these specific neurons rapidly degenerate, they permanently cease sending messages to the voluntary muscles. The signals just get lost in the void of a failing nervous system. The brain sends the desperate screaming, command to walk, to speak, or to simply grasp an object, but that electrical signal never arrives at its destination. This is universally described as the absolute cruelest aspect of the disease. The supercomputer, her mind, her vivid memories, her fiery personality, her complete awareness remains fully powered on and entirely intact, but she is completely trapped. She becomes increasingly imprisoned inside a physical system that can no longer communicate with the outside world. The details of her journey are deeply harrowing. Her animated, fiery television persona is actively being extinguished by biology. Her speech is slowed down to a painful drawl. Her overall physical movement is heavily restricted, and the nerves in her hands have grown so unyielding that simple, everyday tasks like twisting the cap off a plastic bottle of water have become completely impossible. Her mind demands the action, but her hands are entirely deaf to the command. You would naturally expect that a relationship already fractured by $20,000 of insurmountable debt, intense family hatred, and psychological exhaustion would instantly shatter under the crushing gravity of a terminal illness. The script dictates a tragic collapse, but reality subverted the expected narrative. Instead of breaking, Sumit stepped into the grueling, unforgiving role of a full-time medical caregiver. He completely obliterated his past life, reshaping every waking second around her rapidly deteriorating daily needs. The trivial, camera-ready arguments that fueled a decade of reality television simply burned away into ash. When your partner cannot swallow or open a bottle of water, passive-aggressive comments from an in-law completely ceases to matter. It forces a realization that the extreme adversity of their highly publicized drama may have actually functioned as a bizarre psychological boot camp, stripping away the performative layers of their relationship and leaving behind a core of profound, quiet intimacy. They were no longer fighting a television network or hostile parents for validation. They were now standing side by side, fighting an unwinnable war against human biology. But this profound, quiet intimacy was destined to collide violently with a monolithic, unfeeling obstacle that cannot be reasoned with, negotiated with, or swayed by human suffering. The sweltering, relentless environment of their life in India, with its chaotic streets and suffocating heat, became a geographical prison. Treating a rapidly progressing neurodegenerative disease requires a hyper-advanced medical infrastructure, a network of specialized neurological wards, experimental therapeutics, and respiratory support systems that they simply cannot access from their current location. The brutal medical reality is that her only fragile hope for extending her life, for slowing the aggressive march of the disease, lies thousands of miles away in the United States. The realization sets in like a creeping frost. Survival demands an immediate transatlantic exodus, but the doctors in India issue a chilling, absolute mandate. A 30-hour international flight is a grueling gauntlet of pressurized cabins, turbulent layovers, and severe physical exhaustion. For a woman whose voluntary muscles are actively dying, whose hands can no longer grasp a railing, and whose body is becoming a heavy, unresponsive shell, enduring this journey alone is a guaranteed death sentence. The medical documentation is clear, stamped, and signed by leading specialists. She requires her permanent caregiver, her husband, by her side for every agonizing second of the journey. He is no longer just a spouse. He is the external machinery her failing nervous system desperately relies upon to survive the transit. This undeniable, life-or-death medical reality crashes headfirst into the absolute, unyielding concrete wall of international immigration law. Enter the cold, clinical architecture of the United States border bureaucracy. A marriage certificate, once the triumphant finale of their television narrative, is utterly worthless in the face of rigid algorithms and consular checklists. Under normal, functioning circumstances, Sumit would enter the labyrinth of applying for a spousal green card. But that legal pathway is an endless, suffocating desert of financial sponsorship proofs, extensive background checks, and meticulous medical clearances that routinely drag on for 12 to 24 agonizing months. But ALS does not wait for a backlog in a government processing center. ALS is a biological thief that steals milliseconds, quietly severing nerves while politicians debate quotas. They cannot wait 2 years. They do not have 2 years. Their legal maneuvering must pivot to an act of sheer, terrifying desperation. They submit an application for an emergency tourist and spousal visa, armed with a mountain of clinical evidence, doctor's notes, and desperate pleas aimed at the highest levels of government. Yet here lies the claustrophobic paradox of non-immigrant intent. The entire United States visa system is a rigid, unforgiving machine explicitly engineered to reject and repel any applicant who displays the slightest intention of remaining permanently on American soil. The consular officer, sitting comfortably behind thick bulletproof glass in a sterile, air-conditioned embassy room, is forced by law to weigh a desperate human anomaly against a strict, standardized legal checklist. But in this horrific case, Sumit must stay in the United States permanently because his continuous, unyielding presence is the only thing keeping his wife's biological machinery functioning. It is the ultimate legal paradox, a fatal catch-22 designed to crush the desperate. Strong medical proof guarantees absolutely nothing when the system itself is an iron fortress of paperwork, lacking the fundamental flexibility to accommodate a biological emergency. Imagine being trapped in the back of an ambulance, the sirens screaming into the night, the paramedics working frantically to keep your lungs inflating, only for the vehicle to be violently pulled over and impounded by the Department of Motor Vehicles, because the clerk's ancient computer system lacks a drop-down menu for terminal illness. The doctors shout, the monitors flatline, but the unblinking eye of the bureaucracy simply stares back, demanding the proper forms signed in triplicate. Every single sunrise spent in this international waiting room is another irreversible defeat in Jenny's nervous system. The delays are not merely inconvenient, they are physically destructive. Desperation pushes them to contact senatorial offices, begging politicians to rip through the red tape, but the gears of the machine refuse to accelerate. The panic escalates beyond digital pleas and sterile embassy waiting rooms, forcing a physical intervention. Jenny's daughter, Christina, is compelled to abandon the safety of her own life in the United States, boarding a plane to plunge directly into this logistical nightmare. She crosses the globe to serve as an emergency escort, a desperate attempt to physically extract her mother and her stepfather as a single, indivisible unit. But with every passing hour she spends navigating the chaotic sprawl of India, the physical updates become increasingly grim. The weakness in Jenny's hands continues its relentless, creeping advance, moving steadily up her arms. You can almost hear the biological clock ticking down with every labored breath, every failed attempt to hold a pen, every agonizing delay imposed by a faceless government official meticulously reviewing a file. They are trapped in a bureaucratic purgatory, suspended over a terrifying abyss between a life-saving medical infrastructure they are legally barred from reaching and a devastating neurodegenerative disease they cannot outrun. But even if they manage to pry open the rusted, unforgiving jaws of the international immigration system, even if Sumit is granted the emergency visa and they miraculously survive the agonizing 30-hour flight across the globe, their terrifying ordeal is nowhere near its conclusion. The tragic, cruel irony of their desperate race across the planet is that they are merely escaping a bureaucratic prison in India, only to throw themselves directly into a towering, dystopian financial meat grinder. They are fleeing the geographical constraints of a developing nation to face the monolithic, merciless reality of the American healthcare system. Securing treatment for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis in the United States is an undertaking that financially annihilates even the wealthiest of families. The astronomical costs are staggering and absolute. Basic health insurance is a flimsy shield against a disease that requires total, round-the-clock physical management. Insurance algorithms will routinely deny coverage for experimental therapeutics, aggressively dispute the necessity of in-home nursing care, and refuse to fully fund the highly specialized, motorized mobility equipment required when a human body becomes completely paralyzed. They will need retrofitted vehicles, mechanized respiratory support, and constant, grueling physical therapy just to maintain baseline comfort. The $20,000 of inescapable debt that previously suffocated them in India is a mere microscopic fraction of the financial devastation that is currently hunting them. Facing total economic collapse and the terrifying prospect of untreated terminal illness, they are forced to make a massive, deeply uncomfortable psychological pivot. They have to turn back to the very people who spent the last 15 years relentlessly judging their every flaw on national television. They have to turn to the audience. Launching a desperate GoFundMe-style digital fundraising campaign, they are effectively crowdsourcing Jenny's physical survival. This introduces a terrifying, deeply unsettling question about the fundamental nature of modern media consumption and the razor-sharp, double-edged sword of parasocial relationships. A parasocial relationship is a deeply ingrained, one-sided psychological bond where a viewer feels a profound sense of intimacy and connection with a media figure, while that figure is entirely unaware of the viewer's individual existence. When a couple invites the global public into their messy, chaotic lives for entertainment, when they allow millions of anonymous strangers to watch them fight, cry, and make highly questionable life choices on reality television for over a decade, a dark, transactional contract is silently forged in the minds of the audience. The viewers begin to feel a genuine, unshakable sense of ownership over the narrative. This creates an ethical wasteland where the audience feels entirely entitled to act as judge, jury, and executioner of their character. Even in the face of a horrifying biological tragedy, that ingrained voyeuristic judgment does not simply evaporate. When Jenny and Sumit suddenly and legitimately need urgent financial salvation to survive a neurodegenerative death sentence, sections of the internet react with overwhelming skepticism. The digital mob demands a complete moral and financial audit of their past. Viewers ruthlessly resurrect old television clips, dissecting ancient arguments about a failed internet cafe and past familial disrespect, using these heavily edited, manufactured plot lines as justification to withhold life-saving donations. Imagine the sheer, profound indignity of this digital reality. Jenny is trapped in a failing biological vessel, watching the nerves in her hands slowly die, yet she is forced to log onto social media to defend her past relationship mistakes to anonymous, faceless strangers, simply because she desperately needs their money to afford basic medical care. She is fighting a brutal war in the comment sections of Instagram while simultaneously suffocating inside her own body. It is a completely dehumanizing spectacle, but in our current fractured healthcare and media landscape, it is an absolute necessity for survival. The lines between a private, agonizing medical tragedy and a public, monetized spectacle become entirely indistinguishable when you realize the television networks are allegedly preparing to turn this terminal descent into fresh, consumable content. Rumors suggest that cameras may once again follow them, documenting the grueling reality of ALS for a brand new season of television. It becomes a highly complex, symbiotic nightmare of exploitation and survival. The family desperately needs the massive exposure of the television network to drive empathetic viewers to their GoFundMe page to afford her care. The television network, in turn, fully understands that the audience's morbid, unyielding fascination with the couple's tragic downfall can be highly monetized for lucrative advertising revenue. Everyone extracts something from the dying nervous system of a reality television star. The private horror of muscle atrophy, the desperate gasps for air, the quiet tears of a husband turned full-time caregiver, all of it is meticulously packaged, heavily edited, and sold as premium dramatic content to an audience that demands constant, unending entertainment. When you take a step back and look at this entire 15-year saga, the pivot is absolutely staggering. For a decade and a half, we watched this couple navigate manufactured, highly controlled hurdles. We watched long-distance love, scripted cultural differences, and predictable family drama, all safely contained within the predictable confines of a seasonal television arc. The narrative was simple, the conflict was easily digestible, and the resolution was always scheduled for the season finale. But the script has been entirely incinerated. The reality they are facing today is messy, terrifying, and playing out in real time without a producer to step in and yell cut. The safety net is gone. It serves as a stark, chilling reminder that behind every glowing screen, behind every viral meme, and behind every heavily manipulated piece of reality television content are fragile, mortal human beings. They are subject to the exact same unforgiving biological horrors and the exact same cold, bureaucratic red tape as the rest of us. The armor of television fame offers absolutely zero protection against a failing motor neuron or a denied visa application. If our most painful, vulnerable, life or death moments must be packaged, audited, and sold as digital content out of sheer financial necessity, we have to ask ourselves what happens to the fundamental nature of privacy, of human dignity, and even of love itself in the modern digital age. That is the real, unscripted horror story playing out right in front of our eyes. If you found this investigation gripping and you want to continue plunging into the darkest, most compelling realities hiding just beneath the surface of the media you consume, hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts on this dystopian nightmare, and subscribe to the channel right now so you never miss our next deep dive into the truth.